Week 5 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I would bench this week. The first guy, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. So Matthew Stafford this season, it's been tough sledding for him for the most part, especially the last 2 weeks. Week 3 at Arizona, 249 pass yards, 2 rushing yards. And Week 4 at San Francisco, he was the crash test dummy in that ball game, and he had trouble getting that ball down the field besides getting it to Tyler Higbee and Cooper Kupp. 254 pass yards, a pick six, and a fumble loss in that one. And now the Dallas Cowboys coming to town on Sunday afternoon. And this Cowboy pass rush, one of the best pass rushing defenses so far in the league, with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence leading the way. I still think Stafford could have a decent ball game, 15-20 fantasy points, but with the offensive line woes and just the trouble finding other guys besides Higbee and Kupp, it's going to be tough for him. Allen Robinson's been a bust so far for this team. They're definitely missing Odell Beckham, who was a nice weapon on the outside and open the field up for this Ram team. But there's no way you could trust Matthew Stafford this week, and I don't even have him ranked in my top 12 of quarterbacks. So this week, if you got better quarterback options, like a Jared Goff, even a Russell Wilson, I would start over him, or a Trevor Lawrence, I would make that move this week. The next quarterback's Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jimmy G, he's failed to ever average 20 fantasy points per game in a season. I know he's been okay so far since he's been the starter once again after Trey Lance went down with injury. But the last 2 weeks, not really fantasy value at all here, unless you're in a 2-quarterback league and have no other options, obviously. Week 3 at Denver, 211 pass yards, a touchdown, and a fumble loss. And Week 4 versus the Rams, if Debo didn't break that big one for a crazy touchdown, he doesn't have a good game at all. 239 pass yards and a touchdown. He would have only had about 10, 11 fantasy points. So this week here, I know it's a good matchup on paper at the Carolina Panthers, but I think the defense is going to do most of the damage, and Jeff Wilson Jr. as well. So Garoppolo in this one, his ceiling's probably 20 fantasy points, which isn't horrible, but there's so many quarterbacks I would rather have this week than him. Even a Teddy Bridgewater, if I had to choose in a 2-quarterback league or something like that, I would take over Jimmy G this week. So right now, he's a quarterback I would bench. In the third and final quarterback I look to bench this week's Kenny Pickett of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's about time the Steelers made the change. And Mike Tomlin, I think he waited too long to go to Pickett here. What did you think was going to change with Mitchell Trubisky from last season to this season? Even though I thought Trubisky would be a little bit better coming into the year with good weapons with Najee Harris, even though he hasn't utilized him at all out of the backfield catching the football. Chase Claypool, who's been a total bust and disappeared so far. Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, who's the hot pickup this week. But right here, he's thrown into the fire right away. Last week, coming in relief in the second half for Trubisky. The 3 interceptions, and that's obviously something you're going to see from a young quarterback, especially in a tight ball game it was with the Jets. 120 pass yards, 3 intos, 15 rush yards, a touchdown in that ball game, and 2 rushing touchdowns. So right now, he can rush the football with those Pickett. He's got a little mobility, and he's got good weapons, but this just isn't the week here in Week 5 at Buffalo. That's one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in all of pro football here, to throw him into the fire. So right now, as a pickup 100% as a backup, or a guy in 2-quarterback leagues as a backup, yeah, I agree with that, and I mentioned him on the wire this week. But this week, to go out there and start him in his first career start versus a buzzsaw type of defense like Buffalo, it's a recipe for disaster. So that's a few quarterbacks I would bench here for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.